the US market, though, isn't it? They're so heavily advertising driven that you have to be saying something or offering something that no one else in the market actually does. You know, it's not good enough to have a 5G service.
Yeah.
You have to have 5G. That is different.
Yeah, and you've got to have superlatives. I mean, it's got to be the greatest 5G in the world. Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. We've got the usual crew of me, Jamie and Iain from Light Reading. Everyone's a little bit worse for wear today, aren't they? So I was out first with Out There Media, where I met Kirsten and Daphne, who founded the company. And they have very good taste in rosé champagne, I'm pleased to say. It's quite funny, actually. I was sitting there in my other down in some kind of metal T-shirt. And they were going, "Is this champagne all right?" I was like, "Yeah, that'll do." But that was cool. It was great chatting to them. And then after that, I went and hung out with Red Hat and hung out with my mate Amy and Dave and the indisputable leader of the gang, TC. And that went on till quite late. So that was that. What's your excuse for struggling, Jamie? What were you up to?
Same again. Yeah, we were out with Vodafone.
Right.
And yeah, it just went on quite late, so feeling a little bit delicate.
Late enough for you to miss your train and drinking beer on a park bench almost.
It was in the concourse,
tramping it up at Euston
with a very friendly guy called Tim,
right?
Who is originally
Tim.
from Newcastle, now lives in Tring. So
right.
So yes, we were both waiting for the same train. So
and was sort of fortuitously equipped with Moretti's.
Yeah, he had a load of Moretti's. So yeah,
excellent.
Happy as Larry. And on that note, I've got a little surprise.
Oh,
so I nipped out to grab this horrible stuff because someone is keeping it a bit of a secret that it's his birthday today. Who might that be?
Who is it?
So Iain has turned 46 today.
Oh my God!
So here we go.
You got him some
sweet.
manky generic Scotch.
That might help, actually.
You can have the first swig.
Go on.
Have the dog.
Happy birthday to you. Go on then.
Oh, we haven't done that for a while, actually. When was the last time we were drinking booze on the podcast? Actually, it was recently, wasn't it? It was in the hotel.
Yeah. Right, thanks for that, Jamie.
Thank you, Jamie.
Hair of the dog.
Very kind.
So we're all sharing germs, yeah?
Pierre's going in.
You're right.
Well, the alcohol will probably sterilise it, if that's any consolation.
Oh, smooth, right?
Anyway, what an incredibly meandering start to the podcast. What we're going to talk about this week, we are going to start by talking about, Jamie just wrote about At&t saying that they're going to have 5G everywhere, and you presumably have some scepticism towards that claim. So we'll talk about that first. And then I'm going to talk about India and I think we might have talked about it on the pod before, but there's just a saga going on. Government wants zillions of rupees. In fact, I might have a bit of a moan about Indian numbers while I'm at it, because they do my head in. And then we conclude, we can go back to 5G, but we're going to talk more from the vendor side. There's what I call 5G wacky races. They're all sort of they're announcing their deal wins, and there's a bit of a race going on there. So that's that. And if you're watching it on the site or on Facebook or on YouTube, you can listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, and countless other podcasting platforms. And then lastly, before we get on with it, let me hand you over to our sponsors.
Mobile service providers will need a different approach to successfully roll out 5G new radio capabilities. Check out Amdocs Software automated and analytics-driven solutions at amdocs.com/5G-fast to learn more.
Cool. Thanks a lot, sponsors, once more. Right. At&t. So you go for it, Jamie. What's going on?
Yeah, so the announcement which came out this morning was that they are going to be able to deliver nationwide 5G, as they're describing it, by mid-2020. And this is basically off the back of a T-Mobile announcement, which was about 3 or 4 weeks ago, that they're going to do exactly the same, but they're launching their nationwide 5G network on December 6th. So it's one of these one-upsmanship, which is so common in the States. But again, it's just advertising gone mental,
right?
Once again, because although it is going to be 5G, you really have to question how much 5G it actually is.
And what does nationwide mean?
Nationwide, yeah. I mean, I'm massively sceptical that they're going to get nationwide 5G because, let's be completely honest, they don't have nationwide 4G at the moment. So, yeah, that's where I'm a bit sceptical. But then at the same time, they're going to be delivering it over sort of like low-band frequencies. So you're never going to be able to get the 5G dream, which is, eye-wateringly fast speeds over low-frequency spectrum.
No, because
it's just
need
impossible.
Fatter chunks of spectrum, don't you?
Well, yeah, I mean, even if you do have like the massive chunks of spectrum, you're still not going to be able to get the hundreds and hundreds of megabits per second downloads that 5G is promising.
But it is. I could well be wrong here, but the reason you get that is just because at higher frequencies you can have a contiguous 100 megahertz or something, and you can't get that. That just isn't available in the lower license one. Is that correct?
I think so.
Or is there something to do with the actual physical property?
The physics of it.
Is it?
Because you can carry more data over
Can you?
a line.
I didn't know that.
Well, no, because if you think the higher the frequency, the more often you're getting a blast of that line, if that makes sense, as opposed to a continuous.
Might need to hashtag fact check that one.
Well, yeah, but if you think about it from a physics perspective, a single line going like that will get into your phone and it'll deliver X amount of data along that line. Whereas
I didn't know that's how it worked. Well, you live and learn. Okay, but yes. So either way, so you can get a nice lot of coverage with lower frequencies, but you're not going to get super duper 5G. Whether it's because of the contiguous frequency or because of the physical properties or some combination therein. So that's a bit BS. What cracks me up, AT&T started the year by lying about 5G.
Yeah.
And now they sort of haven't learnt their lesson, have they?
Well, that's the thing. You're not going to get the experience that everyone imagines on low band frequencies. And secondly, the other thing that they've done as part of this announcement is that they've created a new G. So 5G plus exists because on the millimeter wave. So when you're getting millimeter wave, so they're using a lot of 28 gigahertz spectrum in the cities at the moment. That service has been reclassed as 5G plus, even though it is just 5G.
So they've leapfrogged 5G and gone straight to 5G.
They just need to give their marketing people a holiday, man.
Yeah, they do. They always have to stick something stupid like plus or evolution or
Deluxe.
whatever it is at the end of
But this is the US market though, isn't it? They're so heavily advertising driven that you have to be saying something or offering something that no one else in the market actually does. It's not good enough to have a 5G service. You have to have 5G. That is different. Yeah,
and you've got to have superlatives. I mean, everybody's got to be the greatest 5G in the world.
Well, I just wonder how, because we always talk about America as like a 5G leader. Yeah, it's perceived to be one of the nations out in front whenever you see those little charts that analysts knock up. And I'm not saying that they're not kind of up there among the pioneers, because they are rolling it out, they are doing stuff. But I just wonder if some of this marketing rubbish kind of sort of persuades people that they're further ahead than they really are. I mean, Jamie and I, we were out last night with Vodafone, and it's not new. Scott Petty's been he's the Vodafone CTO. He's been Vodafone UK CTO. He's been quite critical of this whole US 5G lead thing in the past. He's really kind of scathing about them. He's like, all they have is millimeter wave at the moment. They don't have the mid-band stuff that which you kind of...
Have they had an auction of it?
Mid-band, we were talking about this earlier. They don't have... The mid-band's locked up. It's used by, I think, the Navy, isn't it?
The
Navy uses it.
The Navy is using has proprietary rights.
So you've got either really low band stuff, which is good for coverage but rubbish for speed, and you've got millimeter wave, which is great for speed but doesn't go through trees and things. Yeah, and it means that they've basically just got hotspots of super fast services,
and is actually very short distance. So AT&T
just full stop.
I mean, Verizon have had a load of issues. So Steve Bell, one of the heavy reading analysts, well, last time he was in the UK, I was talking to him about Verizon's millimeter wave 5G experience, and he was saying, like, there's one street in Chicago at the time, don't get me wrong, it was months ago that I was actually speaking to him, that is hooked up with all these sort of small cell delivering millimetre wave 5G, and he said it's awful unless you're standing sort of like directly below it.
Right.
It's
so there's not even a sort of acceptable handover from cell to cell on this one street with all the
mainly because they don't have the range.
Yeah.
And he even says that they're directional as well. So
because you've got a beam forming or whatever it's called.
So to do coverage with those millimetre wave things, you'd need hundreds of thousands of base stations, basically. And I can't remember which analyst company it was. It was a bank, actually, an investment bank, was talking about China versus America, the kind of 5G race. And they were saying that America's only likely to have about 10,000 base stations rolled out by the end of this year, 5G base stations, which is not very much considering the size of the country. So if you look at the UK market, I think BT's got something like 19,000 4G base stations.
Total in the UK is about 41,000.
Right, and the Chinese operators are all aiming to have about, I mean, they've only kind of just launched services, but they're aiming to have, I think it's about 80,000 5G base stations by the end of this year. And, you look at their overall site footprint and it's kind of millions. So,
I mean, one of the things that AT&T said in this press release this morning was that obviously millimetre wave, and I'm presuming they're going to be going off something like, well, T-Mobile has pretty much got all of 600 and 700 locked up, so they must be looking at, 800 megahertz?
Yeah.
So they're going to get long distance on that. But their millimetre wave assets, they actually only say that the range is 1,000 feet, which is, you think of how spread out base stations are nowadays for 4G, they're not going to... That existing infrastructure is going to leave a lot of not spots everywhere.
Yeah.
There's, I know you can layer sort of 5G with 4G, and they're turning off 3G as well. And for the IoT stuff, you can actually keep your 2G switched on. But it's realistically there has to be more densification.
And it's I find it hard to imagine almost there ever being a time. That noise is Jamie forcing Iain to drink more scotch. Of there ever being a time where there are enough little small 5G small cells.
No.
Yeah.
So at best, what you're going to get with outside of things like sort of private networks and that sort of thing, at best what you're going to get is you're going to look at your phone and you're going to like, oh, 5G, oh, it's gone. And it's just going to sort of come and go. You're never going to have, I would have thought, a smooth, continuous experience of the kind of bandwidth, the kind of throughput that you're describing. So that's all feeling like a bit of a mirage. And as you say, when American marketing teams get all carried away and start promising the Earth, you're just like, oh, give it a rest.
I mean, they need access to the mid band, and there is a couple of good initiatives which they're trialing out in the US, so the sort of 3.5 gigahertz is locked up to the Navy, and it's an incredibly inefficient way to allocate spectrum because by the very nature of the Navy and ships moving, you're not going to be using that spectrum in that place all the time, if that makes sense. Because a ship moves. So what
the Navy would want the really low frequency stuff, wouldn't you?
It's
the range.
But it's the most useful, isn't it? It's called the innovation.
I suppose
bands.
It's what they've got used to using as well. So their equipment will be were designed to work on that. So you take it away from them, and it's like, well, what the hell are we supposed to do now with this equipment?
And
that's not going to happen. Can you imagine the press of just sort of emasculating the Navy? That
they'll still need high throughput on data as well, won't they? So I mean, this is why mid-band is so valuable. It's such that tolerable compromise between speed
Hasn't
and
Russia
coverage.
got the same problem? They've got their 3.5 gigahertz is also used by the military, I think. So they've allocated a really odd band for 5G. I think it's 4 point something.
Okay.
So it's apparently the only other countries that use that band or have sort of said it could be set aside for 5G are China and Japan, and the company that's got like most expertise in sort of designing products for that band is Huawei. Which is well in there with the Russians apparently.
So I can't imagine the Russians got a big problem.
But I think the interesting thing they're doing in the States, and we were talking about this earlier, is that they're piloting this dynamic spectrum sharing mechanism. So effectively, you have a 3-tier access to the mid-band spectrum. So at the top tier, the Navy get priority use. So if there is a naval asset in that in a region, they get that band of spectrum. Now, when that leaves and vacates the area and frees up the spectrum, the second tier gains access. So when priority there are mobile operators. And then if there's no mobile operators in that area wanting to use that spectrum, then it goes down to the third tier, which is private enterprise, sort of like other use cases.
Yeah.
So it's going to go wrong because the first time you do anything, it always does go wrong. But I think that's a really, really interesting idea of sort of dynamic spectrum sharing.
It's a good opportunity for people like Ericsson who go on about that a lot, don't they?
The dynamic spectrum
Spectrum sharing, yeah.
Yes. I was just trying to work out... Sorry, I had a train of thought.
Your last night's coming back to haunt you again.
Yeah. Exactly. How
much pink champagne?
We had a couple of bottles in the end, which I thought was good skills. Especially as that was just getting started.
Starters.
Yeah. In the US thing, do we have a sense of whether any operators doing better than others in the great 5G race, or is it all just smoke and mirrors and it's really impossible to tell?
Do they even say how many users they've got?
No, not yet. I think it's largely redundant in the US who's doing better because they're all prioritising different regions, if that makes sense. Like it's not like the UK where all of the telcos are going to launch a 5G proposition in London, Manchester, and Cardiff, and they'll be gunning for each other. AT&T is focusing on certain places like Dallas, where they've got their headquarters. T-Mobile is looking at other areas. A lot of them are, for instance, I think Verizon's the only one in Chicago, possibly. I might be completely wrong.
They just made an announcement about some of their 5G-ness, didn't they?
Well, talking of sort of competitive advantage, in the UK, Vodafone's making a big claim that it's in a much better position than the other service providers for a reason I hadn't heard before. They say they're using antennas that are a lot more sophisticated. So these massive MIMO antennas.
Yeah.
And you can put like loads of transceivers and
64 by 64.
Scott Petty says we're the only operator building a network with those. All the others are using less capable stuff, and he reckons they're going to have to swap it all in about 3 years' time because they're going to run out of capacity.
So that's interesting. If we assume he's accurate, it seems counterintuitive to me that in an open, free market, one operator would have a distinct technological advantage because they chose to buy a superior technology and everyone else didn't. It just seems odd.
It's expensive.
Right. So it's just a capex
and they probably think
thing.
Well, it's the same question. It's the same challenge as fibre versus G.fast. BT chose G.fast because it was more financially attractive at the time, and they didn't need fibre. G.fast would satisfy the demands at the time, and it's the same with these antenna. You don't need 64 by 64 right now. So you can have happy middle ground,
so
but that does
mean
But it does mean you've got to gut everything out in a couple of years when you do need the additional capacity.
Yeah, I think he's exaggerating a bit when he says they're not using it at all. But I've certainly heard from other people.
It's big in the States. Massive MIMO is big in the States.
Yeah.
Well, another thing I'll give Vodafone credit for is that they're even having things like this dinner you guys were at.
Yeah.
I don't think any of the other operators in the UK are doing stuff like that, are they?
Yeah.
If they are, we're just not getting invited, which wouldn't surprise me.
Well, I do.
That's true.
Yeah.
So what other dinners with UK operators have you been to?
You get
3, O2,
Really?
Never the E ones, but Orange.
I don't know if do you do ones?
Yeah, they do. I found out last night, but we don't get invited to that.
Right.
Yeah. It's the mainstream rags that the consumer rags get invited to that one.
Yeah.
I don't know. I wouldn't take that, Jamie. That's a snub. Cool. Actually, talking about Vodafone, that's quite a good segue into the next thing, unless anyone else got anything more to say on that one. Well, no, good. Because it's interesting that Vodafone's the one that's going for the capex, because they're the ones who, in some ways, are the most financially strained.
Yeah.
They've got all the debt they've taken on from buying all that Liberty stuff, but the big one is India, which is just an absolute car crash for them at the moment. So just to recap, I can't remember whether I've ever spoken about this on the pod, but about a month or so ago.
Let's not forget though. Let's not forget that They are under strain in certain markets, but this is still the fifth or sixth largest, financially largest telco in the world. So they're still profitable.
I'm not saying they're in dire trouble. I'm just saying that they're probably feeling a bit strapped for cash. So it makes it all the I suppose bolder of them to if what your chap from Vodafone says is true, that they're spending more than other people on.
Well, and also it's like this, this site swap they're talking about doing, the European sort of tender that we were talking about on the last podcast, 150,000 sites. I mean, it's very unlikely they're going to come and rip out all that equipment, but even doing a small sort of swap out would be an expensive move. But the guy, I just put that to the head of network strategy, and he said, well, but it makes sense in the long run.
Yeah.
In the long run, you have to have. They seem to be I quite like that with an operator. They take a sort of long-term view of where they need to be, I suppose.
But this is the thing about. I mean, I can't talk too much about sort of at group level or other sort of national businesses. I can talk about a few of them, but from a UK perspective, I think they've got a really, really sound CEO who understands how to do business. He was quite frank last night, and I've spoken to him a couple of times in the last few years, and he's literally turned around and said, Vodafone was in a terrible position. If you go back 10 years, Vodafone was the market leader. They took their foot off the gas. There was some suspect spectrum allocation with EE a few years after that, and launching of 4G services. So they fell massively behind O2 and Vodafone, and Nick Jeffries is quite frank about that. He's like, we were not in a good place. So they've spent so much money and so much time rebuilding the proposition, including the network.
After Ofcom shafted them.
Yeah.
You're talking about them letting EE refarm the 1800.
Yeah. Which I think pretty much screwed all the operators up, didn't it?
Yeah, I definitely remember there being a lot of moaning from everyone else and a lot of triumphalism from EE at the time.
But I also like the way he sort of his whole take on the whole City Fibre thing. I thought was really intriguing.
Yeah.
He's like basically that that they've got City Fibre building high-speed fibre networks that they're going to use to provide services on, and he sort of made the whole thing out to be like this very sort of careful plan by sort of a cunning scheme that Vodafone came up with to get BT and Openreach to sort of lower the cost per home pass.
By introducing competition.
Yeah, by introducing competition. He says that their cost per home pass was ridiculous, what they were saying. For a national provider to be able to do, a scale company. We went out and talked to City Fibre. They came back with this plan that showed they could do it for a lot less.
Yeah.
And we've teamed up with them, and that's forced Openreach now to respond.
Yeah, good.
So
yet another
he was
example
like,
of why...
what did he call it, smart capital or something?
Yeah,
we build fibre with somebody else's money, basically.
Well, that's what his big thing about it was. We don't want to build fibre. We built, they build fibre in the backhaul of their own network, but they don't want to build fibre because realistically that's not their job. Their job is to be a better consumer or enterprise-facing company. Yeah. And I think it's a really sound strategy. And they were the first guys to start heavily investing in this in a converged network. They've taken a very, very long-term approach to rebuilding the organisation, and I think they're looking good. I think they're looking
just
good.
In time for the Labour Party to nick it all off them.
Yeah.
Yep.
But where they're not looking so good is in India. Back to my little segue. Just to recap, there's something going on in India basically to do with historical licence payments to the government, and they. For spectrum allocation and licence payments and all that sort of thing, they say that you've got to pay something like some percentage of your annual gross... What is it? What's the acronym?
Oh,
AGM, something like annual gross
revenue or something, isn't it?
AGR, maybe that's
gross
it.
Revenue.
Yeah, annual gross revenue. And you're like, okay, well, that's fair enough. That must just be a line on the accounting, but there's a fair bit of dispute over whether that gross revenue should be applicable specifically to... the telecom services that use that stuff that's licensed, or to all their revenue, full stop.
Yeah.
And there's been lots of wrangling about that. And then the Indian Supreme Court, a couple of months ago, I think, just went, nah, it's got to be the top end. And so you owe the government, I think the grand total was $13 billion, something like that. And it's mainly got to come from Vodafone Idea and Bharti Airtel, because this stuff goes way back to certainly 10, 20 years back. and the other main player, which is Reliance Geo, has only been around, obviously, for about 3 years, or however. Yeah, I think it's about that.
2016, yeah.
Yeah.
December 2016, I think, was their first launch.
So, and these two, and Bharti Airtel and Vodafone Idea are already really struggling because of Reliance Geo, because Reliance Geo is a little bit like, you're talking about getting favourable treatment from the regulator. Reliance Geo seemed to get a really decent leg up when it started, which at the time sort of thought, well, fair enough, in the name of competition, let's help there be another player. But I think they let the genie out of the bottle too much.
Yeah.
And now it's on the verge. I mean, they even say it themselves when the incumbents started moaning about this bill, which they said virtually sort of bankrupts them. And I think Nick Reed, the Vodafone guy, even muttered something like, maybe we'll just bail on India entirely if you're going to be like that.
Yeah.
Which led to much sort of retaliation in the Indian press by the Indian government. They're already in real competitive trouble, thanks to Geo getting this leg up, and Geo was giving stuff away for free, so it had a massively depressing effect on prices and all that sort of thing. And then on top of that, this massive bill, it's making it such that you could see Geo end up being the total monopolist.
Yeah.
No, well, yeah. No. I mean, I do see, I do see it going that direction, but they don't seem to ever want to let the state-owned telcos fail. So I think the state-owned telcos will continue to exist.
Which is about, 10-15% of the market? Something
No,
like
I'd say even less than that. I think it's
Probably
about
less,
2 or 3.
I don't think they have data licenses to offer data services either.
Oh, that's a good
like
point.
4G
That's a good
licenses.
point.
I don't
Okay,
think
so
have,
they'll be around, but let's say for the sake of argument, in terms of the competitive landscape, they don't really count.
I mean, at the moment, it's a wholly unsustainable market. I like the idea that Geo came in, because India was in a massively sluggish position.
Yeah.
It was falling behind the rest
It's
of the
really
world.
fragmented.
Incredibly so. I mean, they just weren't pushing digital out to people. It was, smartphone penetration and internet penetration was ludicrously low prior to Geo coming along.
Yeah, I mean, in China you got 100% smartphone penetration. You got everyone using WeChat to pay for everything and do all kinds of cool stuff. Yeah, such a contrast.
Yeah, any developed markets, you usually get about 110% smartphone penetration. Now that only equates to something like 60, I think it's like 75-80% of the population
with
ownership. Smartphones. Well. And some people are too young.
Yeah.
You're not going to put a smartphone in the hand of someone under the age of 13. Or I don't know what the average
well, you say
age
that
is now.
People do
under
now,
the age of 10, let's say then.
Yeah.
Because I was looking at the figures the other day, and the price per gigabit in India is just so low. I mean, it's 26 cents a gigabyte. Right. Now, just in comparison, some of the healthy markets where you've got sustainable pricing, it looks to be about the £6 or £7 or $6 or $7 dollars per gigabyte. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that entirely depends on the annual income of the average annual income. But I mean, I ran the numbers the other day, and as a percentage of monthly income, price per gigabyte can go up in India. It is sustainable to go up almost double, I'd say. So here's the stats. I mean, it doesn't show very well, but I mean, in the UK, for instance, the average price per gigabyte is 0.193% of monthly income. Now, in India, it's 0.155%, and in places like the US, it's 0.236% of their monthly income. So there is room for it to go up, and you'd
think the market should be able to tolerate it.
Yeah, the wallet should be able to tolerate it. I mean, obviously, there's different factors and different, and we were talking about this before. But India isn't a market where they've got sort of like high inflation rates on food or clothes or anything like that. It's not like the South American, Venezuela, where they're paying 50 quid for an apple or something like that. So their wallets can tolerate a price hike.
Yeah. So maybe, as you were saying,
don't like it.
No, that was your point. But And that's the only tricky bit. So you're completely right in terms of just purely crunching the numbers. There should be plenty of plenty of space to raise prices.
Yeah.
But you have to manage those price rises because everyone's always going to moan, even if you raise it a tiny bit.
No one wants the price to go up, but ultimately, I mean, they're not going to like it, but you need it. You know, if the telco industry in India is going to be sustainable and healthy, and right now it isn't. Your exact points about Vodafone, is that the points about Bharti Airtel, you know, the government having to prop up their state-owned telcos. This isn't a healthy dynamic in India at the moment. So prices need to go up to ensure that the telcos are financially capable.
Well, so the two incumbents are using this massive bill they've got to pay the government as an excuse anyway.
So they are putting their prices up.
And they've announced it. And Geo
has.
So everyone's putting their prices up.
Announced it.
Geo announced they were going to start charging for stuff that they were previously giving away for free, which is kind of inevitable.
Yeah.
I mean, they were always going to go for this sort of internet.
At some point, they want to make money.
Yeah.
And they're not the Labour government, are they?
Even though they're bankrolled by the richest dude in India.
You'd be surprised if you actually look at their balance sheets at the end of each quarter. They are profitable.
Yeah.
They are actually making money on this proposition. They've gone for the whole, you know, scale versus sort of price.
And they're a lot more sophisticated when it comes to digital partnerships.
Yeah, they've got a pretty
non-tariff
sophisticated network as well, haven't they? It's very automated and
they're sort of like cross-selling and sweating the brand is remarkably good.
Yeah.
You know, they sell stuff like they've got a TV offering, they've got a Geo Health, they've got loads of different supplementary businesses which all ties in and sort of piggybacks on the connectivity business units.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see because the guy who's responsible for that network on the technical side, Tariq Amin, is a bloke who's now gone to work for Rakuten in Japan.
Okay.
Try and do the same thing there. So it'd be interesting to see next year when that supposedly launches at mass market scale. And that's even more sort of new technologies.
Yeah,
because that's a software-defined network.
That's a software-defined network.
The beginning, isn't it?
That's all sort of new kind of open RAN technologies and everything.
Just on
so that would be
an SD card somewhere.
Yeah, I'd be really interested to see because he's made a really big case for cost savings, like a massive saving on what you'd spend on a traditional network, like ridiculous amount. So if that carries through into the kind of prices they can charge and they get some real big competitive advantage from that, then that could cause mayhem in Japan. And then what does it do in other markets? If people go, well, hang on a minute, there's an opportunity here to come in and do something disruptive.
Well, Japan is one of the markets where again, going back to this table, because I've just spent the hour before we come in here actually building out. I only referenced 5 or 6 countries there.
Oh, you've done some more to it, have you?
I've got a table.
You're getting like Iain. You're getting all into your spreadsheets.
Yeah. And Japan is one of the ones where price per gigabyte is quite high in comparison to comparable nations.
Yeah. So I'm not that surprised because I think the cost of living is quite high in Japan in general, isn't it?
You'd be surprised. Like, I mean, looking at the average monthly wage as well, it's not too dissimilar to what we're on in the UK. So it's not remarkably dissimilar. But there is opportunity because of the price per gigabyte is quite high. There is opportunity for Rakuten to come in and undercut and make a really good go at it, and especially with a completely software-orientated network where you're realising cost savings everywhere, they can charge less.
He's been looking at your spreadsheet.
Well,
he hasn't, obviously.
Yeah, he's been
just done it. But
I was just looking at your spreadsheet and reminded that it's pretty expensive in China.
China is really expensive, and South Africa. The US...
I'm surprised China is. I guess it's just not as competitive as we'd like to think.
Yeah. I mean, they're what, like $9 a gigabyte or something like that. I mean, some of them are remarkably expensive. I'm looking forward to actually crunching these numbers because some of them are like Greece. I was showing you before, Pierre.
32 or something.
$32 a gigabyte average. It's some of these countries are, and in some of them are really. In terms of the percentage of annual income, I've got it on that spreadsheet there. France is incredibly low. Right. So is Finland. So is Sweden. Some of these countries are expected to be higher.
Less than 0.1%.
What was Monaco again?
Oh yeah, but their average salary was just ridiculous.
It's funny because
It's like £106,000 a year.
Most of these people don't actually have a salary; they're just rich.
Yeah, they're just tennis players and TV people. So.
Yeah, they just sit there on piles of gold,
Yeah.
rubbing their hands together.
Or like Smaug.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think it's a really interesting comparison when you look at, and I'd never thought about it before, but yeah, the price per gigabyte, it varies so much. So actually trying to figure out what is a reasonable price per gigabyte for a sustainable telco industry. And I would have assumed that the UK was a relatively good example because all of our telcos aren't massively financially strained. They're going to complain, don't get me wrong, they want to make more money, but they're not that financially strained when you compare it to other markets. But then you look at France, where it's like a third of the price, and
$2.99.
$2.99. So half the price. But their telcos are doing fine.
Yeah.
You know, they're in a. You know, Iliad's came in and caused a load of problems a couple of years ago, but that seems to have balanced out. You don't see the French telcos, scrapping behind the sofa for a couple of pennies. They seem to be all right, yet they managed to offer data at such a lower price. It's a really interesting conundrum.
Be interested to see what's happened in Italy as well with Iliad coming in, because they all seem to be having problems just keeping hold of customers at the moment. They're all disappearing and going off and taking up Iliad's service. So
I mean, that's a market where the telcos are screwed a little bit, though, aren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, Tim's in all sorts of bother, not only because of its spreadsheets, but because of what's going on in the boardroom as well.
All the Elliott stuff.
Yeah, Elliott, Vivendi, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a market which is just chaos constantly.
Yeah.
But that's a bloody Italians. They're constantly like that, aren't they?
With their scooters and
just
pasta.
constantly falling over, tripping over long strands of spaghetti that are hanging off the table and stuff like that.
I'm gonna nip this lapse into national stereotyping in the bud. So back to India, which we're not going to announce any national stereotypes about. Don't want to get in trouble. So yes, the conclusion of that sort of original narrative is this week the government went, all right then, you don't have to pay for some spectrum that you just won in auction for a couple of years. And that amounts to, I think the amount of that was about a third of the bill for these historical licence fees. So, so you got Vodafone and Bharti saying, look, if you don't do something about this, we're going to go out of business. Whether or not that's true or whether they're just hamming it up, I don't know. And then the response is just to delay a much smaller debt for a couple of years. I don't see how that really solves the problem. It probably helps them with short-term cash flow.
Really. It's like
the government or the companies?
The government. It's like on the one hand, they've sort of said we don't really like foreign firms and we want to give Ambani a big leg up and and they've constantly been penalising Vodafone ever since it went into that market with court cases. I'd be interested in hearing Vodafone's assessment on how bad the whole Indian story's been, because they went in obviously thinking massive market, big opportunity to grow, and they've just been caught up in all sorts of issues and spent massive amounts of money. So
the thing is now they're on an upward trajectory because they're one of the fastest and most aggressive countries, sort of like shifting up the gears into digital.
They're being like sort of China 10 years ago or something.
Yeah, and it is a massive opportunity for the likes of Vodafone, but they're getting caught up in all this collateral damage flying around everywhere. But there is a massive opportunity there. This is an incredibly young market, and they're so eager to embrace the digital world.
It's obviously the best growth potential market in the world. They're going to become the most populous country in the world soon.
But, and the great thing about it is that you say it's got massive potential. This is, I think, one of the most exciting things about India is it's not like Brazil, where you see that there's a massive amount of sort of potential in the Brazilian market, but you've got to do a lot of stuff, and it might be 12, 18 months away before you start seeing some accelerated growth. India is going through this accelerated growth now. The foundations have been laid, and over the last 3 years, Geo has given it a kick and has actually got it moving, and the potential is being realised now by Geo. Bharti Airtel and Vodafone Idea have got to do something to actually say, look, we can make a lot of money, but how do we do it?
Yeah.
And I just find the country fascinating. It's the largest democracy in the world by a long way by population.
Yep.
You do have a fairly sizable, quite highly educated middle class in India.
Yeah.
You know, so
it's getting
you
bigger.
look at the IT sector. Look at how many companies around the world are now run by people who were born and educated in India.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there's a lot of that going on, and yet their GDP per capita is tiny.
Yeah.
So they've still got this enormous sort of agrarian, skint underclass.
And they've got
So-
they've got an incredibly young population as well. I think their population,
Yeah, 'cause they're
the
growing like
median
crazy, yeah.
age is
It's low.
incredibly young.
That's why they're going to overtake China.
Yeah.
Although China's obviously
Yeah.
had a strange attitude to having kids historically. What was I going to say?
Do you know what? I think that's actually just. I was watching a panel show the other day, and I can't remember what it was, or it was something on the radio, and they said, you know, this one child per family, it was never actually official policy in
Right.
China. I can't remember where I read that, so it's just one of those. It's one of those facts that everyone says, oh, you know,
I
of
see.
course that actually happens, but it's a little bit of a myth.
Right.
I think there was an unofficial policy,
That'd be
but it was
interesting.
never. They
Yeah.
tried to control the surge in population, but it was never an official
Well, it is now
government
because you have
policy.
to pay if you want another child.
Is that what you got to do? Then?
Yeah, you pay like a.
On top of how much it bloody costs you anyway.
Seriously, it's true.
Interesting. It'd be interesting if we had Way in here. He could probably give us much more accurate historical sort
Yeah.
of take on it all. We'll ask him after, and he'll tell us that we're talking for the whole podcast
About everything.
about everything. Just scratch that one. Just one last little postscript before we move on to the last item is that Vodafone, if I remember rightly, has completely written down its Indian stuff to zero. It has no book value.
Really?
Its Indian operates. Yeah, that's why its last quarterlies it booked a massive loss.
Right.
I believe. Again, I'm starting to really wonder whether, because I'm quite tired, whether I'm just making this stuff up. But still, I'm all you got, so tough. So they've just written it down. They've just said it's worthless from an accounting point of view.
That's actually not a bad position to be in.
Well, you can't go any lower,
You
can
can't,
you?
if it's worth nothing, you can only go up. So you know, maybe that's actually a good place to be. Would have had to wear an incredible amount of criticism, and you know, probably take a lot of flack from investors.
Yeah.
But it's not a bad position.
And
to be in.
they've already booked the government debt as well.
Yeah.
So they've just, even though they haven't paid it, they've accounted for it.
Yeah.
So the only way is up.
Well, that's one way of looking at it. So yes, 5G wacky races. The most read story on Telecoms.com this week was me writing up a Nokia press release where they announced they got their 50th named deal win with Spark in New Zealand. And I was like, okay, nice one, but let's have a look at the broader context. And not too long ago, Huawei spoke about 60 deal wins. And Ericsson's on about 78 or something, I think, on that little site they have.
Is it really?
Yeah. It's quite a lot. So it ended up. So I just compared the three, and I think
that's a lot. Well, they haven't named 78 customers, have they? Because they normally just go along with the ones they.
No, that's right. On their little map, there's about 30.
What are these two up to?
So there's basically
I'll just cut Jimmy off. He keeps hitting the mic.
My mic.
right. Actually, can we have a little sort of hand signal for just turning Jamie's mic off? They do. So they do three. They do it in three. They have just total wins. They have named wins, and then they have live networks.
Yeah.
So I think total wins 70 odd, named is 30 odd,
Right.
and lives.
Because they used to just say they had, that any customer that's named, that's a deal, but they wouldn't say anything about other ones, including the number. So they changed the way they do it.
They do all three. They're the most transparent, I think. Although Nokia in this latest thing announced like 50 wins, 20 odd named,
Right.
10 live, something like that. I can't remember.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me Nokia's behind.
Yeah, I mean,
the problems they've
one thing
had.
I did say, I certainly didn't mean it to have a dig at Nokia. I just thought, let's look at the context. And I think considering all the stuff, as you're just alluding to, where they've admitted they kind of took their eye off the ball a bit with 5G, it's not bad that they're only 10 behind Huawei.
Yeah.
But it is. I mean, it is largely redundant, though.
Yeah, as a
Yeah.
measure of anything.
I mean, what would you rather have? 50 contracts with European telcos, or would you rather have the Reliance Geo and China Unicom, just 2 contracts? I mean, those 2 contracts probably account for more than the vast majority of European telcos.
Well,
even if
China
you
Mobile alone.
Well,
would-
China. So Ekholm, Ericsson's boss, says China's 60% of the 4G market.
Yeah.
Wow.
This is why they
itself.
want to grow their share in China by itself.
And I mean, India's going to be massive as well, geographically and
Yeah.
population-wise. I mean, if you can get Africa involved as well and surge them forward, I mean, there's some massive. Like, if you get a Vodacom contract, for instance, that's massive.
Yeah.
Or MTN.
Or MTN, or
But this
Geo.
gets back to this whole how many sites you've got, yeah? Because you're selling equipment at a site, that's expensive. If you've got millions of sites, which they have in China,
But it's one deal.
and you're building out. I mean, there's so many base stations in China, and they want to have. I don't know what the target is next year for 5G base stations, but it's high.
Yeah.
And they're talking about only having 10,000 at the end of this year in America. It's a massive imbalance. I mean, the weird thing is, how much are people actually paying for base stations in China? Because you look at, I mean, you'd expect if you've got 1 million base stations, if you're rolling that out and trying to build that many, and you're spending what people are spending on them in the West, your capex is going to be at some kind of ridiculous level as a
There's
percentage
going
of your
to be a
revenues.
price break at some point, though, in there.
Yeah, I mean,
The average price I did is about 25
I
pounds.
think people, Western companies basically subsidise the Chinese. So there's no way that Huawei and ZTE are charging what they charge in
I see.
Europe.
Yeah,
in
but
China.
that's just scale economics.
But I don't think it's even scale economics. I think it's all part of a kind of government push to have as many 5G sites out.
I think it's fairly safe to assume that with all the stuff going on in the US, that the Chinese government's been chucking money at Huawei and ZTE anyway, just to make sure.
Well,
they
that's always
keep
been the
going.
suspicion, but I certainly think in
But even
terms
more.
of to have this kind of site footprint, there's got to be some kind of discounting or
Right.
or subsidy that's involved in that. I just can't see how they could do it otherwise.
Well, it's become a sort of geopolitical thing. So not only is it a bit of a pissing competition between the vendors, but for countries to be able to say, like Trump sort of tweets about it every now and then. I know that
He wants Apple to build 5G now, doesn't
Yeah.
he?
But for countries to be able to say we're ahead
Well,
on 5G.
He opened a manufacturing plant yesterday. Did you see?
No.
Right. Was that one that had
Is
actually
this the
been
thing
opened
with-
about 10 years ago?
Yeah, it had actually opened in 2013. But
Yeah.
what's his name? Tim Cook just allowed him
Just
to.
let it go.
I saw some
Open.
tweets that
Oh,
Apple's
the
got everything.
Texas one
Yeah.
Cook,
for the Mac Pro.
innovation.
It's been open for 6 years, but Trump opened it.
He just makes stuff up, doesn't he? So, yes. Oh,
I don't
one
think
other
you guys
thing.
are drinking enough whiskey, by the way.
That's your birthday,
Sorry.
mate.
Not my birthday.
Everyone knows in classic British fashion, when it's your birthday, by about
do a
6 on
podcast
a
and drink
Friday,
loads of
you've just
whiskey.
got to be doing a tramp impression in a gutter somewhere.
I will do the same on my birthday.
Right.
When's your birthday?
I'm not telling you.
Well, then we can't hold you accountable. Yes, you made the mistake of telling Facebook when
It's
your
on
birthday is.
Facebook, I know. Yeah, that's why. It's got my actual birthday
So
in it.
one last thing on that subject before we start wrapping it up is we were talking just before we started about KPN and who's got the RAN there. What was that story?
Yeah, so this was Telecom Paper reporting this originally,
Okay.
I should say.
Okay, credit where it's due. You owe us one
And,
Telecom Paper.
They've reported that Huawei has now come in and started building a radio access network for KPN in the Netherlands,
Right.
and it's phasing out Ericsson basically while it's
Oh.
doing that. And they actually signed an agreement with Huawei back in April, and there was a lot of reporting at the time about Huawei not being allowed in the core.
Yeah.
So they'd not linked it to security issues, but they said they want to have a multi-vendor network, and therefore they go with a Western supplier in the core, but use Huawei in the RAN. And they'd previously used Ericsson in the RAN. That's, if you go back years, you can see they've struck a 4G deal with Ericsson. That was their 4G supplier. So, yeah, they're basically phasing out Ericsson and putting Huawei in, which is a bit of a setback for Ericsson, considering it's often been the other way around in Europe in the last couple of years. It seems to have made some inroads into Huawei's footprint.
Well, rumor has it that it's also. So I'm still largely unable to confirm it.
Right.
But
Sod it. Go with it anyway.
Just go with it anyway, and I'll see if I can confirm it. They're being a pain, so no one's actually given me a straight answer about it yet. But Ericsson lost an MTN contract to Huawei in Africa somewhere.
Right.
Not South Africa, but one of the other.
Okay.
one of the other markets.
Right.
So this doesn't necessarily apply to Africa, but in more sort of like, I'm not ever surprised to hear about Huawei sort of gaining ground in Africa. I think when we were speaking recently about the AfricaCom stuff, Huawei has incredible reach, as does China, full stop, in places like Africa, because they've got this Belt and Road sort of economic imperialism thing going on. But I think it's interesting if Huawei's taking RAN share from its competitors in sort of US allied places like Western Europe, it's quite possible that Huawei being banned from the core makes it more likely it's going to get RAN business for when the operators want to have vendor.
On the network. It's a really interesting point. I hadn't thought about it, but it's like, and that almost seems to be what's happened here. They maybe there is some kind of government pressure that we don't know about. I think there've been some comments with the government saying it's not going to sort of interfere with vendor choices in the Netherlands, but we do know what goes on behind the scenes. And we were talking to Vodafone last night. They're quite open about they don't want Huawei in the core. They have conversations with security agencies in the UK all the time, and it just seems like it's not a good thing to do, basically, to have it in the core.
This is just a logical way to do business. So, I mean, this is what I hate about the US market, is that they don't distinguish between dumb and smart parts of the network. And, dumb parts of the network, which is largely hardware orientated, like radio, like the access, like the optical, you can. It's very tricky to compromise that. It's very tricky to compromise the radio side because there are 40,000 radio antenna in the UK, or radio station base stations in the or cell sites in the UK. Sorry, so you'd have to compromise if you want to guarantee. Sort of like you're going to be able to spy on someone, you're going to have to compromise 40,000 cell sites because, like for instance, for me, I might be here, so you could compromise the local cell site, but then if I go to the pub down the road or I go to Pret to grab lunch, does that mean I'm handed across to a different cell site?
Yeah.
So but the intelligent part, the smart part of the network, which is more like the core, which is more software orientated, then you can do some
then
real
you can just
damage.
track Jamie, regardless, because you've got that sort of core.
Yeah, so you should. So this is what I think the Europeans are very good at: is distinguishing between the dumb and smart parts of the network.
Yeah.
But I suppose the moral of the story is it's not necessarily as advantageous to Nokia and Ericsson as we might have thought.
No,
because of what we're talking about.
And there's
with
more
the RAN
money
stuff.
in the RAN. That's where all the spending goes.
Yeah, because there's more kit.
So there's more kit.
The other thing to think about is that it's not a particular strength. Well, I mean, obviously Huawei is good at mobile cores, but if you look at where they are most dominant, they've never been particularly dominant in the core. It's always been the access and radio network where their products are head and shoulders above everyone else. The core is something where they've never really established themselves as the dominant number one player.
Yeah.
But radio, arguably, they have.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting with Ericsson because they're quite aggressively trying to get market share at the moment as well. So, they've indicated they're willing to take less profitable contracts even to try and increase the market share that they lost badly actually during the 4G phase when Huawei came in. And, you look at these Del Oro charts that show market share and it's just kind of goes down about 6 percentage points for Ericsson in that whole sort of era. So they're quite aggressively trying to get back up. So anything like this is just not a particularly
helpful.
good sign, really.
No.
But, yeah.
Cool. All right, I think we run out of time. I need to just reintroduce our sponsors one more time. So here you go.
Mobile service providers will need a different approach to successfully roll out 5G new radio capabilities. Check out Amdocs software automated and analytics-driven solutions at amdocs.com/5G-fast to learn more.
Thank you very much, sponsor. And I was going to say happy birthday again, Iain. Good lads, knocking back your generic blended Scotch whiskey that Jamie generously bought you for your birthday.
It's the only thing that they had, which was like
Very
a shoulder
kind.
bottle.
It's been 18 years.
Yeah, they didn't have like.
We should have it in a brown bag just to add some class to the whole podcast. He's making Pierre drink it. Pierre's got to go home and look after small children. You're being very irresponsible.
I'm going to go out to the pub after this. So.
Yeah, it's got to be done, and it's rude not to. It's Friday.
Yeah.
So on that note, thanks a lot for bearing with us, and make sure you join us for the next one.